Hello, lovely writers, and welcome to another Writerly Wednesday. Today I'm going to answer another question that has come from my lovely Writerly group, and that is one that may be stumping a lot of you who are getting into the writing, and I'm afraid that these kinds of questions really get in the way of good writing. So let me give you the question. It was, what is the difference between literary fiction, commercial fiction, and upmarket fiction, right? And first I want to say, please, please, please focus on your writing. When you are writing, when you are creating, just write the story you want to write and don't worry about figuring that stuff out, because that's really the job of the agent or the publisher in the sales aspect. However, once you've finished your manuscript and you've got your story written and you've edited it and you are looking to pitch it, it could be helpful to know what area you are looking to pitch, because of course you're trying to pitch the right agent or publisher. So I will answer the question as well as I can. Okay. Literary fiction generally is said to be character driven. It values form and language over plot. And so sometimes that means that people can consider it to not have a lot of pace, and sort of that's why it's seen oftentimes as the opposite of commercial fiction, although there are many shades of gray. I would just want you to know right now. But having said that, the way that people think about literary fiction, it feels to me oftentimes like it's a little bit more masculine in that it is about form and the use of language, and not so much about plot and more about having intriguing characters, or it's really stretching and pushing the boundaries, and that's about as kind as I can be. Commercial fiction is generally what people think of as genre fiction, and oftentimes it is plot driven. And when I say plot driven, I mean that when we think of pulp fiction or books, really popular books from people like Dan Brown, per se, and everything feels very external, like there's definitely, it's easy to read, right? It's not taking a lot of efforting on the part of the reader. That's what's considered commercial fiction. And when I say genre, it could be a genre, it could be sci-fi or fantasy, but it could be romance, and it could be action, things like that. Upmarket fiction is fairly new, and it is a little bit of both. It's like character driven with plot, and it is there's an internal transformation going on, but it's easy for the reader to access the transformation. So in literary fiction, that's very much open to reader interpretation. There might be multiple interpretations. Commercial fiction, it's pretty much laid out there. Like the majority of the people reading that story will come to the same conclusion about what it's about. Whereas in literary fiction, you might get all sorts of people saying, oh, it's about this and it's about this, which feels more like analyzing poetry. And upmarket fiction is like a beautiful love child between the two. So you can hear, I quite like the concept of upmarket fiction, even if I never use that terminology. Why? Because I just want you to write a really good story. But for me, a really good story takes into account these two things. You've got wonderfully developed characters who are taking us through their process, and the plot is, it sort of makes sense, and it naturally unfolds as we are watching the transformation of the protagonist. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If you go and Google it, you're going to see lots of places where they'll give you different examples of this is literary fiction, and this is commercial fiction, and this is upmarket fiction. Maybe, again, some of it, or especially upmarket fiction nowadays, can often be considered really good book club fiction. So if you are writing something that you want to be widely accessible and popular, the commercial side, but also really focusing on the message that you want your reader to have, that's what I always encourage my writers to do. That should be the umbrella that it sits in. But first, write the story you want to write, and then worry about figuring out how you are best going to sell this wonderful manuscript that you've written to potential agents and publishers. Maybe you've got some examples. Maybe you want to share some examples of literary fiction, commercial fiction, or upmarket fiction that you think is a perfect example of any of those type of genres or sales identification markers, whatever we're going to call it. You can tell that it's not the way that I tend to think of story, but I would love to hear any response that you have. Of course, as always, I know you have a story to tell. It's time to tell it. Come in here, share. Of course, you can ask your question, and hopefully I can answer it on a future episode of Writerly Wednesdays. Until next time, bye, lovely writers.